1 second here. I had kind of a really interesting set of observations while I'm on my way to
Greg, wait. Before we begin, man, everyone in the room, does Greg's mic sound a little like fuzzy or something? Or is it just my audio?
No, it could be my machine. I'm on my laptop, and my machine is like really hot. The fan is really hot.
Okay. All right. If it passes, that's fine. I'm always about audio quality, but we can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm on my way to Berlin. I'm going to be meeting with some folks at Describe and some other folks on the RChain team, hopefully, who are in Berlin. Unfortunately, I won't be able to meet. I was hoping to meet with Jack, new from who had done some work with Scenario and myself. But he's going to be out of town. But we have, it's very exciting. But on the way, I had several observations about relay systems. And so I want to make sure to convey some of those towards the end. So I'll give some quick updates, and then I want to hand it over to others to give some of their updates. And in particular, I definitely would love for Kent to give an update. We also have some good news from Ed as well. We had a really productive time. Let's see, Alex Balkan and Joseph Denman, Kent and Glenn, Braun and myself all met from most of last week. So you heard us talk a little bit about that on last Wednesday. But essentially, what we had as a goal was to code up the token contract and hopefully the wallet contract for in Rolang. And we got quite a bit of ways on that. So in particular, we have an implementation of an ERC20-like token that is comparable to the definition that we find on Ethereum. I think in Solidity, the line count is somewhere in the 70s, and in Rolang, it's a little bit longer. We don't have quite the number of language features to compress, but it's about 100 lines, I think. So it's still quite comparable in terms of expressive power. We came up, we sort of nailed down some language features, some that we decided we've been trying to be careful about what features are in for the Mercury release versus what features are out for Mercury. And the team successfully argued to me that we needed a notion of def, which was separate from contract. It's essentially the same as a contract semantics, but it isn't registered to the blockchain in the same way. The state of the def defined processes is not registered to the blockchain. There, it's more temporary. So that was all good. We argued through the semantics of that, and so I'll be updating the language spec for that. Let's see what else has happened. On the business side, we made an arrangement with Pyrofex to help us with our slow and steady exit from the AMP position that the co-op holds. And let's see, a few other things. So we got, Mike and I, as you know, last week, we submitted some papers. We got extensions for those papers. And Mike and I have been working on updates to those papers, which have been very useful, very illuminating, and maybe Mike can talk a little bit about that. Lisa and I have agreed a statement of work. And that should be officially executed this week. And so we are. The co-op now has an acting CFO, which is all good. And welcome, Lisa, officially to the co-op side of the house.
Thanks, Greg.
It's good to have you. It's been very, very helpful.
Well, good. I hope I will be going forward. And I'm excited to be part of the team.
Yes. It's really good.
Got a chance yesterday, just quickly, to be with Kent and Joe on a hike. So that was fun.
Oh, that's great. That's really, really good. I'm glad to hear that. That's excellent. Also, maybe if Kent wants to mention something, Kent will be joining the team more fully in the fall, so I'll let him talk about that if he wants to. But we're very excited. Kent's work as an intern was just outstanding. And let's see. Is Ed here? I would like to. Oh, hey, Joe. Ed's there. Yeah. And Joe and I also had a really good conversation about the pricing model, and in particular the dynamic update side of the pricing model. So that was Joe has some updates on that. So all in all, I've been very excited about the developments. And so I think what I'd love to do is to maybe turn it over, just in terms of sequencing. Let's turn it over to Ed so he can give an update on the holdings side, and in particular some nice business development.
Ed says he's just listening today, so he may not have the ability to present.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well,
I guess he could write something in the chat if there's something short to be said.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Ed can give an update via the chat. That would be good. And then so we could turn it over to Kent, and then Joe, and then Mike, and then I need to jump in at the end to give some of these updates about rewrite systems. So Kent, if you're ready, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Sure, sounds good. So this week, as Greg already has mentioned, we were working on the token.ro contract with Joe, and last week Alex and Glenn. But so what happened since kind of like that Friday, so to speak, is that, I've updated the token.ro contract a bit, just mainly because there were some things that weren't parsing on the compiler, and I just wanted to briefly go over that. So does everyone see this? Yeah. So the first change is that, the match statement here, it sort of needs to be a tuple used in brackets, or the square ones, and then the ones that are in the pattern here need to be in triangles. And this is kind of because of the way we're writing our patterns. Essentially the match statement takes a proc, and essentially this becomes a P pattern if you look down here. Yep. So we sort of need to differentiate our lists a bit, or our tuples. But hopefully that can be adjusted. That's kind of just intermediates or temporary syntax, I would hope. And in the same way, we can't really chain method calls right now, but so that's kind of like a workaround, adding parentheses around the first method call before calling the second. And the match statement has been kind of simplified without the case. This is all like based on the original spec. So, I mean, I think we could discuss changes on, whether we want to add the case or not, and braces and whatnot. But besides that, so the only thing that's actually not currently being parsed by the compiler is the def syntax. So essentially, if you just kind of copy and paste this part, it parses, along with like every other part, sort of disregarding the defs. And the map, this thing doesn't parse, but that this should be easy to add, along with technically still need to add the booleans to the tuples. That should be quick. But and then so one thing I discovered essentially I've been trying to hand compile this token.row contract. This is because I just want to see if it's like actually compilable, and the balance of function went completely fine. But the transfer function, there was a small detail, and Joe already mentioned this once, but essentially balances.get2, if the address of the to account is empty, then it returns an absent instead of like a 0, which is what you actually want. But this, we're gonna have to think about a way to handle this. But so with a bit of magic there, we have the token.rbl and compilation, and this is just taking this code here and essentially compiling it down to Rosette, but only the transfer function and the balance of and all this stuff here. And essentially that is the meat of this token.row contract, because the other functions are useful, but they're not strictly necessary, should I say, for transferring tokens around, and checking balances. That's kind of, I guess, really all you need. But so I just wanted to show a demo that this works. And so just to be clear, we're defining a new namespace, right? Oops, sorry. I have to copy and paste the space.arble code. This is just all the tuple space related logic. I think I've done this demo with Hello World and Cell before, so should be familiar. So yeah, defining the namespace, and then now we're going to define the token actor, which is roughly equivalent to this whole body right here. And so now this code here is sort of equivalent to executing this contract with essentially this sending. So imagine this as like a transaction that will happen in the future. And so this transaction just says, set up the token contract, right? And this actually initializes it with the address me as the owner, and I have 100 tokens. And so then this right here, what it does is it prints out my balance, and then it transfers 50 tokens from me to they, and then it prints out the balance for they. And so this should print out 50, and that's kind of what it does here. So if we see here, hopefully the debug statements are easier to read now. But so let's see. First of all, we have printing balance for me. You know, that was, you know, because we set it up as 100 initially, it shows 100 here. And then there's the print call for transferring from me to they. And then here, printing balance for they is 50. So, you know, this, yeah, so the token.row can be compiled. This is kind of like the proof. And, you know, it can run with just a bit of magic here. Or no, that's not it. Where's the magic? Here, where, you know, we kind of override the absent call with a 0, but, you know, with just that, it runs on Rosette. So that implies that, you know, we can swap out the tables for the actual storage layer, and this should be ready to go. But yeah, I just want to say before I pass it on, yeah, I won't be able to make it to future of these meetings, mostly due to time zones. I guess, I don't know. Greg's pulling off something by still being in Berlin and being able to join these. But anyways, yeah, but hopefully someone else will be passing on my updates for next week. And after that, I'll be traveling mostly. So if anyone has, I guess, questions about, you know, what I've done over the past month, feel free to ask on the #Rolang channel on Slack. I've been mostly, you know, writing up all my updates there, and, you know, there's like Slack notifications for all the pushes I made. But yeah, so that's it for me, and I'll pass it on.
So why don't we have Joe give a quick update on the pricing model? And also, thanks, Kent. That was really nice.
Yes. Hello.
Hey, Joe, can you give an update on the pricing model?
Sure, yeah, no problem. So earlier this week, before Greg left, we had a great talk on settling the approach that we were going to take to actually implement it. And because, again, as we'd said before, that we're trying to reduce the dependencies that we have on Rosette, we're going to do it at the source level, and just do a source-to-source compilation. So what that essentially means is that all of our requirements for phlogiston balances are going to be enforced by compiler insertions. So essentially, and the basics of it is that before we execute any sort of statement, whether that's input, output, or invocations, whatever it is, we're going to insert a conditional that says if the phlogiston remaining after subtracting the cost of the statement that's about to occur is still greater than 0, go ahead and execute the statement. So that just essentially and what it means is practically is that as of now, while we're still working on Rosette, we can still keep a high level model. In addition, I guess another question kind of arises when you have to when you have multiple threads running concurrently, the problem gets a little bit you see new problems. So in particular, if we imagine a contract that we're trying to run, and we're provided a certain amount of phlogiston in the beginning, then in a sequential program, we can very easily, in fact, just deduct whatever amount we are before the next statement runs. In a multi-threaded concurrent program, however, there are potentially many threads that are altering the total amount of phlogiston at the same time. So the solution to that is to come up, or at least one solution that we're exploring is to come up with a sort of allocation scheme where each thread that we generate is allocated a certain amount of phlogiston from the total that's supplied at the beginning of the contract. So dynamically, if they or at runtime, if they run out for whatever reason, then they can query this kind of repository or this like central location for phlogiston and receive another allocation. The cool part is that as our ability to complete and to accurately complete static analysis and as our information on cost becomes more apparent at compile time, that the allocations that we give at runtime are going to get more and more accurate. So eventually, the actual execution of the program should be minimally affected by the amount of phlogiston that the individual threads are actually have. So yeah, that's about where we're at.
So is phlogiston a purely local concept? That is, that it applies to just a single machine, or are machines coordinating on how much phlogiston is remaining?
Let me go ahead and take this one. So when a contract instance is launched, at that moment, the rev that was supplied is converted into phlogiston. And then that contract, a part of that contract instance state is what's stored on the blockchain. So as the state, as the contract is executing and the state is transitioning due to the processing of transactions, the state is updated, meaning the phlogiston that's available to it to that particular instance is being updated.
So it's not a security issue if a machine attempts to provide too little or too much phlogiston in exchange for the revs, because it's all chain. Okay.
Well, yeah. So phlogiston pretty much only exists in the execution environment. In the case that someone provides too little, then the VM simply returns. That's like, we can treat that as a halting condition. In the case that they provide too much, the current thinking is that either you give that to miners as a reward or a certain portion of that, and whatever you don't give to miners as a reward, you receive as a refund.
I meant that the computer running the contract specifies the exchange rate, but if they then violate that after the contract is accepted,
right. So the exchange rate, and you're talking about the conversion, like from how much rev will get to phlogiston, right?
Yeah.
So that information can be provided with the transaction. That's a general approach. So you provide that with the transaction, and we can make that like an invariant whenever we go in. So this is the amount of phlogiston that I purchased, and this is the price at which I purchased it.
Great.
Good. Excellent dialogue. Great questions, Mike. So, Mike, you want to give an update on what we were doing with the ladle papers?
Yeah, basically, we were making things more precise. So, for example, our types we've always thought of as predicates. We had to figure out exactly how the underlying monoidal structure of the collections showed up in the typing judgments. For a while, we were thinking we could get away with using just a single hole that has a type, but then looking at, for instance, the SK combinators, K throws away the hole and S can potentially duplicate it. So it turns out that we have to look at whether the theory actually uses duplication and deletion in order to derive the kind of typing judgments we're going to use. Nailed down that typing judgments get modeled as graph functors, inference rules about those get modeled as graph natural transformations, but then proof normalization is modeled as a graph modification, which is like a modification in 2cat, but there's no commutativity requirement. Subtyping is an inclusion graph functor. The inference rules for subtyping involve, let me just screen share for a second. So they say things like, if we can derive that, if in the context where the whole is of type X, we can derive that T is of type Y, and Y is a subtype of Y prime, then we can say that in the context X, T is of type Y prime. So we have both Y on the right and Y on the left here, so we need a dinatural transformation. Then with the modalities, we were able to express those in Scala-like notation or row calculus-like notation to say exactly what we meant by that. Apply the subtyping rules to the modalities. Lots of this sort of nitty-gritty stuff we got worked out. Greg, was there something else that stuck out to you?
No. I just thought the work that we had done was quite interesting, actually, because we've been going through some of the calculations and making sure this works over a range of calculi and has all the properties that were. Sorry, I'm just double checking I wasn't muted. It has all the properties that we're interested in. Like, one of the things that's really important to the organization is that we align the rewrite rules with proof normalization rules, so that we maintain a super high fidelity with reality. So it's not just that formulae are types, but that proof normalization, which is kind of shrinking proofs down to the smallest form, corresponds to the basic form of a computation. And so the desiderata, the quality bar here is super, super high. And taking on these kinds of constraints is really useful because it forces us into a design which is, by and large algorithmic. There's very little in the way of creative freedom in the design of the structure of the algorithm, and that's a good thing, because what we want is that the algorithm, you pour in a language spec or a virtual machine spec, you pour in a spec for a kind of collection and a distributed law, and out pops a type system. And here, before we were just thinking about, the big expansion of this word has been, before we were just talking about the model theoretic side. So we would be doing the type checking from the point of view of model checking. But in point of fact, now what we're doing is doing the type checking in a way that we can do proof theoretically. So this is more symbolic than the model theoretic computations, and that has a significant impact on the performance of the type checking part of the algorithm. So that's very good news for us.
The one other thing that I wanted to mention was determining the variance of operators. So we're able to derive subtyping inference rules for typing judgments involving the generalized possibility modality, but not in general for arbitrary terms, because it's not immediately clear just from the term calculus which things are covariant and which ones are contravariant. So that's some future research for us to do. We may need to ask the provider of the term calculus to also provide variance notations, whether it's invariant or covariant or contravariant.
Yeah, and this is not unexpected, nor is it unusual. For example, in Scala, you give exactly that kind of information when declaring both parametric types and when declaring types that are associated with methods. So this kind of variance, user-supplied variance information is a par for the course, so to speak. On a couple of other business-related things, yesterday, and one of the principals of one of the major exchanges, I won't say which one, but I will say maybe it's the only one that's still operating in Washington State. And I had a very good talk, very useful. The conversation relayed to us exactly what we know from our experience. This is the same sort of thing that's happening across the industry and the exchanges, which is the exchanges are suffering because of the quality of the code for the existing blockchains. So they're constantly up against the wall when it comes both to performance and to reliability. And they have to do a lot of things to hide that from users of the exchanges. But the reality is that that's what they're struggling with on a daily basis. And this is what we knew. Basically, anybody who's done any sort of blockchain maintenance on their local device has had this experience. And it's one of the reasons, frankly, that caused me to look much more seriously at the RChain itself. So that was very heartening to us. That was actually encouraging news, because it means that the market is really going to be ready for the kind of solution that RChain provides. And this is exactly what we expected, what we predicted, and one of the reasons why we're doing this. Additionally, we were very heartened because the message that we got was that at least this exchange is very interested in helping us with the kind of transaction volumes. So once we have a test net up and running, they want to be able to supply us with, transaction data, which will allow us to do transaction volumes that they're seeing on the exchanges, so that we can prove out the claims that we've been talking about with Swift Performance. So this is incredibly exciting because it also leads to the next step, which is that having passed that hurdle, will be listed on at least this exchange. Once we pass all those tests. So already that conversation is underway, and this is the kind of forward planning that we've been looking at and are excited to be proving out. So I'm super thrilled about that. Everything is moving along according to kind of according to the roadmap that we've laid out for quite some time. Let's see, just a couple of things. Alex Bulkin was very instrumental in driving the work around the token contract stuff. So we're super happy about that. I helped Alex. Alex has a formalism he calls the language of mutable functions, which was decidedly a sequential idea. And I helped Alex come up with a concurrent version. So he's pretty jazzed about that. And we're excited to spread concurrency wherever we can. So that was really fun. And then, so it looks like a coin fund. We're getting much closer to sort of the whole self-organizing of a private sale. Basically, every day someone comes to me and asks, "How can I buy rock from the co-op or from holdings or from both?" And so we're kind of providing the substrate for people to self-organize and have the private sale. As more people become interested, I've set up a private channel for those people who are interested. Again, I want to stress that the terms of the sale will be more than fair to the people that participate in the redemption process and to other existing holders and investors in the co-op and holdings. So everyone should be quite happy with the terms, but we'll make sure that once that becomes more nailed down, all the details are nailed down, we'll make sure that that's open for everyone to inspect. We're not doing an ICO. Again, I want to repeat, we're not doing an ICO. This is largely a small subgroup of the RChain community that has been very vocal in their interest to purchase. And the first kind of bar is that we're looking for sort of accredited investors, and we have to do considerable KYC. So that's the big differentiating factor here between the private sale and the public sale. I don't want to make any secret about it. We fully plan to have an ICO when we launch Mercury, and we have nodes running, and the Rev is available as a token. So when that is happening, when that's up and going, that's when we will launch an ICO, and so people have a sense of the timelines there, and that will give us more than enough time to get the word out about the ICO. So again, but that's an ICO for Rev, not Rock. Again, the consideration, the co-op and holdings are still kind of considering, at the conversion what happens, but that my druthers, my leanings is that at the time of conversion, all rocks that are converted are burned. And that sort of makes sense. The council was happier with that solution. So I just want people to be aware that that's likely to be the case. But we can certainly have conversations about that. Okay. So let me stop here and see if there's any questions or comments from folks about everything that's been said. Does anyone have questions they want to cover with respect to either the technical or business side?
Yeah, Greg, just a point of clarification. It's always good. I mean, I know you don't like firm dates, but are we thinking Mercury is next summer? Or when do we see a timeline for the full release?
I've always said that it's 12 months out from when we close auto. I would think Mercury next summer is not a terrible bet. If I were a betting person, I would give good odds on a bet like that.
All right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because if that is the timeline that we can expect, that's really going to coincide with the launch of EOS. And EOS is, I mean, I think they're in the process. I may get this wrong, but I think they're raising money for the next year. Like, they have an open sort of investment. It's insane. I mean, they have all the money in the world, but I would really be interested in obviously seeing our release versus EOS. So
that's good. That's good. It's again, I really appreciate that kind of information, but we're going to be, marching to the timeline of the quality of the code, rather than marching to the timeline of the market.
Yeah.
I know that the market will go up and go down, up and down, and there'll be lots of different solutions. Ours is really unique, and one of the things that I've been so excited by is that the more we talk to people, the more complete I understand our solution. Right? When people ask us questions, it's not like we're scrambling to answer, but in fact, we've had answers that are 20 or sometimes even 30 years in the making. So I feel quite happy about the completeness of our solution. Doesn't mean we won't hit stumbles or roadblocks. I fully anticipate that there's lots of things we'll be learning as we go. I've really enjoyed this last week because I think we had some good learning going on there. But the solution I feel is very, very complete relative to the nascent state of this market. So that's so we're marching to the quality of the code, the quality of the offering, so that when exchanges list us, they don't have to worry about performance. It's turnkey, it's professional, and it just does the job. But I really appreciate you keeping us apprised and aware of offerings like EOS and others. So I'd like to turn attention briefly to some ideas that showed up, which I think are quite interesting. I'm going to screen share now, and I just have a couple of pages right now, but there's more that I want to talk about. So I've been one of the motivations for this work is when Mike and I are considering the ladle algorithm, we're considering arbitrary rewrite systems. So what that does is it means we don't have a lot of information about how terms in the calculus rewrite. The lambda calculus rewrites according to beta reduction, the pi calculus rewrites according to the com rule, and the ambient calculus rewrites according to its crazy rules. And so because we have this wide variety SKI rewrites according to its rules. And each of these, while they are related and we understand that many of those relationships, we can't make assumptions about the rewrite system. It's just a set of LR pairs that take terms of one shape to terms of another shape. And much like when you look at the specification of a virtual machine, you have the machine state and then the execution of the rule and then the update to the machine state. So that's the kind of generality that we have to cover, and so we can't assume anything about the shape. Here I want to talk a little bit about where we have more information about the shape of the rewrite systems and what can we know about the rewrite systems under some moderate assumptions. Along those lines, I first want to describe kind of generic data types for the rewrite rules. And essentially what I'm talking about are data types that are built as polynomials in of a small set of type constructors. So the type constructors are built out of products and sums and recursion and the use of constants, where constants here, again, this should all be thought of as functors. So imagine that we've got this italic K is really a sequence of constant functors, K0 through Kn. You can allow your intuitions to form if you think of these as essentially sets, and then you can think of these recursively defined functors as either least fixed point or greatest fixed point of some recursively defined set. So here I'm describing a type constructor which takes this set of constants and a variable, and then generates what ought to remind one of a polynomial, right?
And we're also assuming that K0 is not empty.
Yes, that's correct. K0 is not empty. So then here, so we have basically a constant plus a constant times the recursion, right? And then we have another constant in product with two uses of the recursion, and so on out to a constant times n uses of the recursion. Right? So that's the basic idea. And now what I'm going to do is to define a kind of formal operation which looks like a derivative. It's in some ways it's like a derivative, in other ways it's not, but it kind of has a formal feel of a derivative. And this is related to what I often call the reflective closure. So here you can kind of it does more or less what you expect from high school calculus. So the K0 goes away. The K1, we get rid of this term entirely. Here, shoot, I should have typed this in. So this was a typo. So in the K1, this becomes the reflective closure. So that's what should be here. And likewise in each of these terms, in the early terms, I dropped the reflective closure, but I fixed it down here. So essentially, you're taking each instance of this recursion variable and turning it into an instance where you substitute in to T the reflective closure. I really needed additional time to let me fix this now though so people can see what I'm talking about. So I'll fix it in this line and fix it up later. So down here, this should be a T applied to that. T is, you give it the K and this thing. There we go. So that's, and the same thing is going to be over in this term. And I'll make these slides available and fleshed out more on the Slack channel. But essentially, everywhere you see a K, a TKX, you're going to take at least one occurrence of it and replace it with the reflective closure. So rho of this thing goes in for X here, and that's what this does, and that then closes up T, and it makes it means that this is no longer dependent on an X, right? This is dependent. This utilizes the reflective closure in at least one position. And so here we knock it out of each of the positions in the I, and so that's what happens here. But remember that I didn't complete this. This is T of this thing, T of K of this thing. But you can see it formally corresponds to the notions of a derivative, right? So this is TKX squared, and it moves down to 2 K2 TKX times the closed to closed form of it. Now, the reason this is interesting is if we think about this polynomial, each of the different terms in this polynomial can be thought of as representing the potential of some kind of interaction. So let me say what I mean here. So K0 is no interaction whatsoever. It's just a constant. Here is a potential for interaction. So there's one variable in this term. So the entity that you should have in mind when we're talking about this would be either the Row-Lang output operator, where K1 is the channel, and this is the process that is, or value that's being output on the channel. Likewise, you can map this onto input, but I don't use that example first because input has a binding operator, and we can and I want to talk about the significance of the binding operators in a minute. So if you just keep in mind that this is like output in Row-Lang, then you can begin to understand the meaning of potential for interaction. Output by itself is stuck, no interaction, but output paired with input, like this thing, it has actual interaction. So here, if you think of K2 as the channel where they coordinate, and this is output and this is input, then you have you can see that this is binary interaction. Now, binary interaction is not, of course, the only kind of interaction that we have. In fact, in Row-Lang, we have ternary interaction and inary interaction because we have joins, right? So again, this is the channel where think of this as the collection of channels where the join might happen, and then these are the different continuations that are associated with a ternary join, and so on here. When I was writing this up on the plane, my partner, my fiance, was watching Dirty Dancing, that old Patrick Swayze movie, and I was so when I was trying to explain to her what I was doing, I said, think of the K's as a dance floor. And here you've got a dance floor but only one dancer. And so it's a kind of lonely thing. There's no potential for any sort of communication amongst the dancers. Here's your dance floor. That's your channel. And here are two dancers. So finally they can begin to interact with each other. Here is three dancers, and this is a whole ensemble of dancers and a dance floor. Now, what do I mean by dancing in this particular case? So what I mean is that we can consider rewrite rules of the form like this. So this is the place where you interact, and these are the participants, the number of participants in the interaction, and then they go to something else. And what's interesting is when I is either 0, so we have just the K0, or this one, then we have what are known in the literature as heating rules, right? So they don't involve interaction. And in general, like with the row calculus, I was super, super careful to not have any heating rules because they provide the sort of force special considerations when you're talking about bisimulation. So in particular, the big difference between the original formulation of the pi calculus, which could be thought of as all heating rules, and Milner's refactoring in functions considered as processes is the elimination of heating rules for the pi calculus. So, which then gives rise to a completely different consideration of bisimulation. And in fact, a lot of the concurrency theory around the pi calculus was in relating those two notions of bisimulation, and in particular, Leifer and Milner's work and Sewell's work was focused on an algorithmic approach to making sure that bisimulation is a congruence when you don't have any heating rules. So now more generally, what we can do is talk about rules where what's on the left-hand side of this is a polynomial of this form. And what's on the right-hand side is the derivative of that polynomial, the row operator of this polynomial. And I call it row because it provides the reflective closure of the polynomial. So at least one of these widgets it has been reflectively closed. The type has been reflectively closed. So in that case, the most interesting thing is that we have now related the ordinary notion of derivative, which is all about rate of change, right? When you take the derivative, you're talking about the change in the behavior of the polynomial. And here, so what I'm saying is when the right-hand side is the derivative of the polynomial on the left-hand side, we've now related two distinct notions of change. So the two distinct notions of change are the evolution of the system as captured by the rewrite rules and the reflective closure, right? And so now what we have is essentially a much higher level view of the row calculus and other calculi that are derived in this fashion. Again, I'll probably give a little bit more details about this next Wednesday, but the cool thing is that you can talk essentially about two kinds of, there are three things that to observe. One is you can talk about rules where you freeze computation. So when the left-hand side is a polynomial of this form and the right-hand side is the derivative of that polynomial, then you're effectively freezing computation in one of the locations. So the way I described it to my partner was that you have some ensemble of dancers and they invoke a particular ritual, which is the rewrite rule, and one of the dancers gets turned into a crystal ball, which freezes the dancer in mid-dance. and then they can pass that crystal ball around or amongst themselves. The other kind of rewrite goes the other way, so it unfreezes the computation. So in this case, you have an ensemble of dancers and the crystal ball, which contains a dancer frozen in mid-dance. And they perform a particular ritual, which is the rewrite rule, and the crystal ball gets unfrozen, and you add a dancer to the mix. So those are the two basic forms of rewrite that are available with this notion of derivative, constraining what shows up on the left-hand or the right-hand side. Now, finally, to close this out, I know we're over time, but I'm indulging myself. So apologies for that. To close this out, I can talk now about some of the significance of the row combinator paper, because the row combinator paper paves the way for this view of interaction. In particular, what it says is we don't need no stinking binders. So if you recall up here, I said, it's kind of this degree in the polynomial represents the potential for interaction, and it maps very cleanly onto output, but perhaps not as cleanly onto input, and that's because input has a binder. But with the row combinator paper, we show that reflection suffices to cap reflection plus the SKI trick that was developed by Curry. It shows that we don't need any notion of binder, at least none of the kinds of binders that show up either in the lambda calculus or the pi calculus. So those all go away. And as a result, we can talk about a wide variety of rewrite rules that have this form, where you have a polynomial which describes the different kinds of interaction, and you have its derivative on either the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And that suffices to cover row calculus, which means it suffices to cover the pi calculus, which means it suffices to cover the lambda calculus. So this is an extremely powerful way of reasosoning about the different kinds of rewrite rules. It's really fun.
Greg, I have a question. It looks like your formalism is general enough to cover the ambient calculus, but the way you had to introduce reflection there was very different from the way you did it in pi calculus.
Yeah, I haven't tackled the ambient calculus yet, which is why I didn't mention it too much in my examples. But yes, that's on my list of targets.
Okay, so I was just going to say, are you expecting that this will give a different reflective closure idea than the one you came up with in the type system?
Well, if you think about it, right? I mean, polynomials of this form are really just like our prologue terms, right? This is your functor, and these are your variables in your terms. So I can do the kinds of, I have all the machinery to do the kinds of reflective tricks that I did back in around Christmas time of last year. But I honestly, this much is making my head explode. So I couldn't fit the other. But I do. I want to sort of wax philosophically and then shut up. So for the longest time, like over 12 years, I've been interested in relating a notion of derivative, these kind of formal derivatives, to a notion of a system evolution as we find in the rewrite rules. And I think this is very important. And specifically, the reason is because in the physical sciences right now, the dominant way of thinking about system dynamics, whether we're talking about the motion of bodies or or the imposition of forces acting on particles, or anything like those kinds of system dynamics, at least in the physical sciences. Newton's insights and Newton's calculus and variants thereof have been what has completely dominated the thinking of scientists and mathematicians, for several hundred years. And it's so entrenched, it's so ingrained in the thinking of the physical sciences that it's very difficult to get across a different approach to system dynamics. Now, in computation, the computer scientists have been somewhat free because their notion of system dynamics is more formal, it's more abstract. It's not tied to physical operations, at least when thought about theoretically. And under those conditions, computer scientists have come up with a completely different approach to system dynamics. And one of the biggest the most general forms of these kinds of rewrite rules. Now, in the last decade or so, maybe decade and a half, several people have started to say, well, I believe that we could utilize this notion of system dynamics to talk about physical systems. Not the least of which is the work that was done by Shapiro and Regev Aviv, and Ehudi Shapiro, Regev Aviv, Bill Silverman, and others, Luca Cardelli, many others have thought about using these kinds of systems to describe biological behavior and chemical behavior. And they've made a great deal of progress. For example, one of my friends, Corrado Priami, he described the inflammation process of cells, leukocytes in flowing in blood vessels and rolling and tethering along the cell wall using a stochastic form of the pi calculus, and got predictions using that way of thinking about system dynamics, which were not found in the differential equation models, so the Newtonian style approach to system dynamics, and which were yet confirmed in the lab. So showing the utility and the value of this way of thinking about system dynamics. The big difficulty has been finding the bridge. Obviously the Newtonian approach is highly effective, right? I mean, engineers use the Newtonian methods every time they want to do stress calculations or other kinds of calculations for building bridges or building airplanes or all kinds of things. And computer scientists use these kinds of system dynamics to prove things about the security of a system or the termination of a system or a whole host of other phenomena. And so we'd like to find a bridge so that we could import the intuitions of system dynamics from Newton into computer science and vice versa, import many of the insights about system dynamics coming from computer science over into the physical sciences. And by the way, I just want to mention that Bob Kuka and Samson Abramsky, Alex Kissinger, and many others have begun to do this for quantum mechanics. So there is such a thing as axiomatic quantum mechanics that looks a lot more like computer sciencey kinds of system dynamics than it does Newtonian system dynamics. But it isn't a general recipe for how to import computer sciencey kinds of intuitions about system dynamics over into the physical sciences. So this is kind of a very, very early stage guess for or proposal for how we can begin to craft this kind of a bridge, and that's why it captures some of my attention. It is sciencey, but it does have significant impact for row calculus and row lang, because it allows us to give a specific form for the underlying virtual machine. So that's how this stuff, so I've talked about sort of the general intuitions underlying this work. I've talked about the broad scale motivations underlying this work. And then the motivations that are related to RChain is that rewrite rules of this form give us a very specific way of talking about the kinds of VMs that we would want to replicate with the Casper algorithm. So it says that we can think about more specific rewrite systems than just the general purpose rewrite systems that Mike and I have been thinking about, or that Vlad and Kent and Mike and I were talking about replicating. So it sort of says, here's a much more constrained set of rewrite systems than we were thinking about before. And those kinds of constraints have significant utility and value because we don't have to reason about lots and lots of edge cases or special cases, which means that our code can be smaller and more focused and much more easy to deliver. Okay.
I'm wondering if this relates at all to the fundamental theorem of calculus or derivative. I got a merit award in high school. I didn't believe that things could go to infinity, even at that age. And I did an independent proof of using difference tables of the derivative. And it seems like you're at that borderline where I was there with your derivative. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jim, you're kind of onto something. Your intuitions are as usual, fairly refined and honed. This is a kind of formal derivative, which is close to the kind of formal derivative that you would have to provide using your distance table. So yeah, very nice, very good. My battery is about to run out, so and we're about a quarter of an hour past. Unless there are any burning questions, I'm gonna jump off. So let me leave it there. Tim, I'm going to be in Berlin at the end of the week, and would love to get together with you. But otherwise,
sounds good.
Sweet. Okay, guys, it's been fun. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Greg. Talk to you later.